evening, everyone. This is, in many ways, scientifically speaking, the most important building out here. It doesn't look very much, but you should keep in mind, Linnaeus constructed this system for naming and classifying plants. He didn't actually invent anything new, he just combined two already existing ideas, tidied it up a bit, repackaged the whole thing, and his brilliance is partly in marketing. So he was very good at selling the idea, because people had already suggested you should name plants from how they reproduce, and they have realized that looking into the flower could give you some good ideas. So Linnaeus took that became the sexual system, and that sounded a bit naughty, so people became interested through that. That's a good selling point. Always work on that angle, that will attract some attention. Linnaeus then took a second idea from someone else, which was to add a Latin name, a binomial name to everything. Family or species and then family. And he made it a bit more thorough, and by combining these, Linnaeus made a system that within one generation was basically accepted all over Europe. So he was incredibly effective in that way. But for plants, to use for the teaching of students, he was mostly depending on dried plants, pressed dried plants. And he built up an absolutely fabulous collection himself. He had more than 20,000 plants. And prosit, as the proper Swedish way of doing it is. And these plants, Linnaeus was nervous, because he knew some of the biggest collections in Europe had quite, just within his lifetime, been destroyed, either by fire or floods. And he wanted to keep his private collection safe. And this is the solution. This is the house he built for his private collection. And starting with floods, well, it will take a lot of global warming before this place will be flooded. I mean, we're in one of the highest points in this part of the province. And secondly, fire. Well, it's built of stone. It stands on rock. You should keep in mind, all the trees you see today, they wouldn't have been here during Linnaeus' times. All this would have been used for building or firewood. So it would have been mostly open here. This would have been cattle grazing, all of this. So now this is roughly what that would have been like. Grass, low bushes, until the goats got them next time. So this would have been very open. So also decently fireproof. And then you have what looks at first glance is just as an addition up there, that shining globe. But it's not just a decoration, because you see there is something attached to it. It looks like a rope, but if you look carefully, it's a metal wire going all the way down to the ground. It's a lightning rod. And this is one, as far as I can say, the first lightning rod installed in Sweden, and probably one of the first in Europe. You see, Linnaeus sent one of his students to London, and this man met Benjamin Franklin. And Franklin was very keen on describing his experiment with the key and the kite, and how to catch lightnings. And it's one of these scenes I would so dearly have loved to see in reality, because this Swedish student, his name was Solander, he had already fallen in with a British millionaire by the name of Banks. The two of them would later sail with Captain Cook and be the people who basically did all the plant life of Australia, or at least the first plant life of Australia. They, together with Franklin, went for a picnic to Battersea Park, where they should do the key and the kite experiment. But the thing was, Solander was rather big and heavy, so he was not good running with the kite. And Franklin was a bit old, so he settled to make the tea. And it was this millionaire who was running around with the kite. And I think it's very lucky for him he didn't manage to catch any lightning, because that experiment is horribly unsafe, really. So probably would have been a rather depressing end to that man. But this Solander described the experiment to Linnaeus. Linnaeus immediately incorporated it. So one of the first lightning rods, probably one of the first built in Europe, and still on its site. Now, Linnaeus thought all this was perfect. He had just missed one little thing, and that is, of course, we're in the forest, even though there was not so many trees, but there are insects, there are mice, there are things like that, and they can get in. I mean, a mouse can get in anywhere, really, if it wants to. So, insects and mice were actually nibbling at the collection. So Linnaeus started to get nervous, and he moved the collection back into Uppsala again. So then he used this building for teaching instead. So if you had been here 250 years ago, Linnaeus would have been in there, teaching the most important guests. They would have been allowed to sit in there, and the rest, they would have been like this, standing out here. Because Linnaeus would walk in and out, and apparently he had a good voice, so you could hear him, and all the windows would have been open. So he could actually teach up to 300 people out here. And if you look in, all the furniture is still the originals in there. So you have the cupboards in which he kept things, you have the benches, you also have that rather strange-looking instrument in the middle, which is a study chair constructed by Linnaeus. Writing desk, lecture stand, book rest, everything built into one. The one thing that isn't correct is that fish you have hanging high up in the ceiling. Linnaeus was sort of an expert on fish. Well, actually he wasn't. One of his good friends happened to be an expert on fish. But sadly this good friend happened to get drunk one day in Amsterdam and fell into a canal and drowned. And charming Linnaeus, of course, to glorify the name of his friend, published his work on fish physiology and sort of just forgot to mention the name of the friend until somewhere around page 50 or so. Linnaeus was kind of nasty in that way. He liked to have his name on the first page, no matter who had written the text. So Linnaeus was, yeah, oh well, things are happening. This is nature. I know nothing about it. Yeah. Thank you. Shut up. There's just two of you. And you're flying towards Arlanda. That's dangerous. If you know where to look, you can actually. This is actually one of the things you see when you fly into Arlanda. If you know where to look. This one, it's a little weird thing in the middle of the forest, so you see it quite well. Well, as Linnaeus officially was an expert on fish, people kept sending him strange fish. And he received a huge skin of a fish that had been caught off the coast of Norway. And he was asked, is this the great sea serpent? And he did a lot of, well, probably reading up, and then wrote a letter replying that, no, this is just a very, very strange deep water fish. And he then named it. Linnaeus himself named 12,000 species, by the way, so he was quite apt at that. And I don't know the proper English name, I don't know the proper Latin name, but in Swedish it's a herring king. And they are deep water fishes. They are today incredibly unusual. And a few years, well, 15 years ago, the Museum of Natural History in Stockholm realized that we still had the skin of that fish hanging in here. It was just a skin stretched out on a plank. And they asked, could we please have it for the museum? They are truly incredibly rare. And the museum here said, yeah, no problem, just get us a copy. And I think the museum expected to get a copy of that grayish brown skin stretched out on a plank. Instead, they got a copy of what the fish actually looks like when it's alive. So that much color wasn't in there, but it makes a good conversation point. And at times, I've actually given lectures in here, and it's kind of special to actually have people seated down on these benches and say that, okay, 250 years ago, really, the students of Linnaeus would have been seated here, and Linnaeus himself would have been in the middle, and yeah, it's a good feel. And just below us, halfway down the rock, there is a small garden where Linnaeus tried to grow his Siberian plants. He sent one of his students into Siberia to collect plants. he got plants. The student never came back, but the plants came. And Linnaeus knew he wouldn't get so many more seeds, so he desperately tried to grow, to make certain that each one of them would grow. And every single thing he tried to plant inside Uppsala didn't work. And then he took them out here and found that this was a much better environment for these Siberian plants. So there's a small Siberian garden down there. And a few years ago, you probably already have heard it a number of times, I probably said it as well, that 2 years ago we had the 300th anniversary of the birth of Linnaeus. And the year in advance of that, 2006, there was an entire, basically a busload of people from the BBC coming here to do a film on the life of Linnaeus. And they spent basically one day filming something that I thought was some grass down there, which apparently was something incredibly special and rare, and it was the one thing we know had actually been planted by Linnaeus that still was growing there, but I couldn't really understand it. And then the next year, when all the great dignitaries came here, David Attenborough became an honor doctor here at Uppsala, and he of course had to go out and spend an hour with that thing, so I still can't understand what's special with it, but you have it down there. Yeah, as you seem to be, well should all of us, let's walk through the